Do you like rock and roll music, especially of like, let's say the 60s? Do you like comedy and witty humor? Then you should definitely read Soul Music by Terry Pratchett. Soul Music by Terry Pratchett is the third book in the Death arc of the Discworld books. It is also my third Discworld ever. I've only read the Death arc, or at least 3 books into the Death arc at this point. Mort I really loved and was really excited about. More Discworld and reviewing more Discworld and really getting into that. And then all of that momentum just stopped completely when I hit Reaper Man, which I really did not enjoy. So I had really kind of mixed feelings and apprehensions going into reading Soul Music. And I will start out with the good news. The good news is I'm going to continue in Discworld. I mostly liked Soul Music. Not as much as Mort, but it was a enjoyable time. And it made me think that maybe the Death arc maybe just isn't quite exactly what I want out of Discworld. And after talking to a couple Discworld folks, they recommended Guards, sort of the City Watch arc. If you have other ideas or thoughts for me, let me know in the comments below, but I think that'll kind of be my next step. But Soul Music had enough laugh out loud moments, and I was connected enough to the main story to feel like I could read the next book. The bad news is it didn't knock my socks off. For one thing, it's a little long. This is the longest Discworld of the 3 that I've read. It's about 400 pages, 420 pages, and that is just a bit too long for me to hang with this writing style in this world, at least in the Death series, which is mostly comedy. Mort had the most heart to it, and I think thematic approach that I really appreciate, and that's probably why I liked it the most. Soul Music certainly has a theme, but it's not a serious one. So as you're probably understanding and getting the feeling of, I was very mixed on Soul Music. What's Soul Music about? Well, as all Discworld books that I've read so far, there's like 2 main plots that are happening simultaneously that are loosely connected. The first is that Death, once again, is getting existential and not wanting to do his duties as the personification of death. I think this is quite funny, but honestly, at the beginning of this book, I was like, again, this is going to be the 3rd book in a row where Death just goes away and that causes weird things to happen. But interestingly, Terry Pratchett doesn't really spend a lot of time with Death in this book. In fact, it's very, very small. So this is maybe even like a C plot to the main story, which has 2 elements. One is a young man named Imp who comes to Ankh-Morpork wanting to be a musician and a star, and Susan, who we find out pretty quick is actually Mort's daughter from the first book, who, because Death is missing in his duties, suddenly starts to be granted the powers of death, and she is starting to have to do some of that responsibility, and she's struggling with that. Along with her, we have another recurring character, which is the Death of Rats, which is the personification of death for rats. So it's a little rat in like a, with a scythe and a cloak and kind of the Grim Reaper look. And that's one of my favorite characters who makes me laugh quite a bit. Susan and the rats sort of adventure to kind of figure out what's going on is really fun, and I really, really enjoy it. And that gives us the strongest theme elements, because what Susan is really struggling with is that if she's Death, she's surrounded obviously by death and things happening, and she wants to act to stop death. So she's looking at someone who's about to die, and she says, it would bounce off and hit him. No one's fault, really. Worse things happened at sea. Worse things happened in Ankh-Morpork all the time, continuously. The man didn't even mean to kill him. It's so sloppy. That's not how things should go. Someone ought to do something about it. Susan struggles with the idea of death, that it is, in many ways, death is not a moral thing. It's just a reality that our living will at some point come to an end. Now, someone's death can certainly be a moral thing if someone kills them or causes them to die through action, or even taking away something from them, or being involved in a system that chooses people. So certainly there can be moral questions involved in death, but it by itself is actually not really a moral thing. It just happens to all living things. And in that way, if you're the personification of death, how do you live in that sort of moral ambiguity of it happening to everyone, but also there are circumstances where it is sad and shouldn't happen. And Susan is struggling with that. And through the normal hilarity, Pratchett helps come to a conclusion of how we might view death in this very difficult way. As a side plot to this whole thing, actually, it's more central. So actually, honestly, so in order of like the amount of pages we have, Death probably gets the least amount, like actual like senior Death. Susan gets the second, and the pages that I think get the most are Imp, who comes in wanting to be a rock star and mysteriously gets this guitar that makes these crazy sounds that people go nuts for. It's quite clearly a stand-in for like the electric guitar. Pratchett clearly has a lot of fun. His conceit for this clearly was either he remembered growing up and going to concerts of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the mania surrounding all those folks, and he was like, I wonder if I could do something about that in Discworld. I guess he did, and that's what this book is, because that's exactly what happens to Imp and his band. I mean, the tongue is firmly rooted in the cheek this whole book. Like, the name of the band is the one with rocks in, I think is the name of it. Just like in any good biopic of a band, like the manager comes in who's like this money grubbing person, and it hits all the beats of like these rock and roll stories of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and has it in Angmorpork, which is like a fantasy setting, and it's honestly for the most part quite fun. But there was a part of me, I'm not gonna lie, that as a millennial was like, oh my god, another boomer talking about how great the 60s and 70s were.
I know. The 60s are an important and exciting time.
Aren't they? It's like there's something happening here. And what it is ain't exactly obvious.
I'm happy for you, but I wasn't there, and this is not as important to me as it clearly is to you. I don't think there's anything that could stop me from having that sort of generational eye roll at points, but it's just an honest reaction that I have to tell you I had. The story does come together at the end. All three of those stories, as in most Discworld, sort of have contact at the end, and there's a very interesting and actually touching scene at the end that I was quite pleased with. Again, I think I mentioned it at the beginning already, but I think this is a bit long for this style of book, to be quite honest, and so I was a little fatigued at the end. As I said, the rock storyline, which had the most pages, was fun at times, but also at different points I was like, okay, I get it. This is going to be another long endorsement for me. While I really enjoyed parts of it, didn't love other parts of it, and especially if you like don't like rock and roll at all, I don't think this is going to be like a super exciting book for you to read. But vice versa, if you're like super into like the rise of the Beatles and Rolling Stones and the British invasion, and then like the Byrds and the Beach Boys and Queen, you know, all these like legendary rising of rock and roll as a thing and the stories around it, you would probably really jive with soul music. I like those things. I don't love them, so didn't quite give it to me. But for that reason, it's not going to be a universal recommend, and certainly not a best of all time. But as I said, I will continue with Discworld. Have you read soul music? What do you think? What's your favorite band of the 60s? And let's talk about it in the comments. First in, last out.